The courtroom fell silent as Officer James Mercer adjusted his tie and leaned toward the microphone. His polished badge caught the fluorescent light, sending a sharp reflection across the room. 15 years on the force had taught him exactly how to present himself back straight, voice steady, eyes making deliberate contact with each juror. And at that point, I determined that the defendant was exhibiting suspicious behavior consistent with someone under the influence, he testified, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had rarely been questioned in Westlake. When I asked her to exit the vehicle, she became confrontational and refused to comply with lawful orders. From a defense table, Maya Johnson watched him calmly, her expression betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside her. She had encountered men like Officer Mercer throughout her legal career, men who believed their uniform granted them immunity from consequences, men who had never faced a worthy opponent. The judge nodded, gesturing toward Maya. "Ms. Johnson, your witness." Maya stood, smoothing her charcoal suit jacket. Unlike Officer Mercer, she hadn't prepared for today with practiced gestures and rehearsed testimony. She had prepared with evidence, with facts, and with the weight of not just her own experience, but the experiences of countless others who had encountered James Mercer on the streets of Westlake. "Officer Mercer," she began, her voice clear as a bell in the hushed courtroom. "Before we discuss the night in question, I'd like to establish some context for the court." A flicker of something, perhaps annoyance, perhaps unease, crossed Mercer's face as he shifted in his seat. He had entered this courtroom certain of victory, secure in the knowledge that his badge had always protected him before. What he didn't know was that he had finally stopped the wrong person. And today, everything would change. James Mercer's morning ritual hadn't changed in 15 years. Up at 5 a.m. sharp, a 3-mile run regardless of weather, black coffee with 1 sugar, and the meticulous polishing of his badge before pinning it to his chest. The routine gave him comfort, reinforcing the order he believed was his duty to maintain in Westlake. At the station, fellow officers greeted him with the respect his seniority commanded. 3 commendations hung in frames on the department's wall of honor. His arrest record was impressive, a fact the chief mentioned at every annual review. "Morning, Mercer," Lieutenant Davis called out. "Another day keeping the streets safe." Mercer nodded, dropping into his chair at the morning briefing. The lieutenant went through the daily reports of break-in at the hardware store, reports of speeding on County Road 16, and increased surveillance requested for the east side of town where new apartments had brought in outside elements. "I'll take the east side patrol," Mercer volunteered, drawing knowing looks from some of the younger officers. His reputation for being particularly vigilant in that area was well established. "Thought you might," Davis replied with a half-smile. "Just keep it by the book." It was a meaningless caution, a formality without enforcement. Everyone knew Mercer operated on instinct, and his instincts had been shaped by decades of biases that went unchallenged in the department. By noon, Mercer had already pulled over 3 vehicles. The first, a middle-aged white woman in a Volvo who rolled through a stop sign, received a warning and a friendly reminder to be more careful. The second, a teenage white boy driving 5 miles over the speed limit, got a lecture about safety but no ticket. The third was different. A young black man in a well-maintained but older model car with out-of-state plates. Mercer called in the stop before approaching, his hand resting instinctively on his holster. "License and registration," he demanded, not bothered with the customary greeting he'd offered the previous drivers. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" the young man asked, hands visible on the steering wheel. "Broken taillight." Mercer lied smoothly. "License and registration now." What followed was a 20-minute stop that included a vehicle search, detailed questioning about where the driver was coming from and going to, and ultimately a citation for a taillight that wasn't actually broken. Back in his cruiser, Mercer made notes in his log that would justify the stop if questioned, which he rarely was. The system worked for him precisely because few had the power or courage to challenge it. At the afternoon shift change, he sat in the break room with officers Riley and Sanderson, younger men who looked up to him as a mentor. "That new district attorney is going to be a problem," Riley mentioned between bites of a sandwich. "Heard she's reviewing all arrests with racial disparity claims." "Politicians," Mercer scoffed. "They come and go. We're still here doing the real work." "She's not just any DA," Sanderson added cautiously. Maya Johnson grew up here, went to Harvard Law. Word is she came back specifically to address systemic issues in local law enforcement. Mercer laughed. Let her try. I've been doing this job since she was in high school. The system works just fine. As evening approached, Mercer began his final patrol loop before clocking out. It was then that his cruiser's headlights illuminated a sleek silver Audi, making a perfectly legal turn onto Maple Avenue. Something about the driver caught his eye a glimpse of a woman with locked hair. His instincts, as he would later testify, told him something was off about the situation. He ran the plates before initiating the stop. The car was registered to Maya Johnson. The name tickled something in his memory the new district attorney, Riley, had mentioned. All the more reason, Mercer decided, to ensure everything was in order. He flipped on his lights and watched as the Audi properly signaled and pulled to the curb. That morning, Maya Johnson had awakened in her childhood bedroom, now converted to a home office with a pull-out couch. 6 months after returning to Westlake, she still hadn't fully unpacked. Cardboard boxes labeled kitchen and books were stacked in corners, her life still in transition. The move back hadn't been planned. After 10 years building a reputation as a formidable civil rights attorney in Chicago, Maya had intended to continue climbing that ladder. Then came the phone call from her mother. Mrs. Wilson's grandson was arrested again. Her mother had said, voice heavy with a familiar weariness. 3rd time this year. Same officer. The story that followed a 17-year-old honor student repeatedly stopped, searched, and eventually charged with resisting arrest after questioning why he was being detained echoed too many cases Maya had handled. But this wasn't just any case. This was happening in her hometown, to people she knew. 2 weeks later, she had accepted the district attorney position that opened unexpectedly when her predecessor retired early. The decision raised eyebrows among her colleagues in Chicago, but Maya understood something they didn't. Sometimes the most important battles weren't in federal courts or high-profile cases, but in small towns where injustice had become routine. Her morning routine included a review of arrest reports from the previous day, looking for patterns that others might miss. She had begun quietly building a database, noting officers with disproportionate arrest rates among minorities, discrepancies in charges filed, and disparities in plea deals offered. Officer James Mercer's name appeared with troubling frequency. At lunch, Maya met with community leaders at Westlake's only black-owned restaurant, Soul Provisions. The owner, Evelyn Parker, had known Maya since she was a child. People are talking about what you're doing, Evelyn said, sliding a plate of cornbread onto the table. Gives folks hope. I'm just doing my job, Maya replied, though they both knew it was more than that. Be careful with Mercer, Evelyn warned, lowering her voice. That man carries grudges. Maya nodded. She'd heard the stories of selective enforcement. The routine stops that somehow only seemed routine for certain residents. The charges that mysteriously escalated when people questioned his authority. After lunch, she headed to the courthouse to meet with Judge Harriet Freeman, one of the few allies she found in the local justice system. The data doesn't lie, Maya explained, sliding a folder across the judge's desk. Officer Mercer's arrest rate for black and Latino drivers is 4 times higher than for white drivers committing the same infractions. Judge Freeman reviewed the numbers with a grim expression. Evidence is one thing, Maya. Changing a system is another. You're making powerful enemies. I didn't come back for a popularity contest, Maya replied. I came back because this is my home, too. As evening approached, Maya headed home, her mind organizing strategy for following day's preliminary hearings. The silver Audi, her one concession to the success she'd achieved in Chicago, hummed quietly as she turned onto Maple Avenue, a route she'd driven countless times growing up. When blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, her first reaction wasn't surprise but resignation. She had been expecting this confrontation eventually. Carefully, she signaled and pulled to the curb, already reaching for her phone to start the voice recording app she had downloaded months ago, just in case. Officer Mercer approached the driver's side window with practiced caution, flashlight beams sweeping across the interior of the vehicle before settling on Maya's face. License and registration, he demanded, the beam of light still directed at her eyes. "Officer, could you please lower your flashlight?" Maya asked calmly, reaching slowly for her purse. "I'm happy to provide my documents, but I'd like to know why I've been pulled over." Mercer kept the light exactly where it was. "License and registration first, then we'll discuss why I stopped you." Maya produced her license and vehicle registration, handing them over while maintaining steady eye contact. "My name is Maya Johnson. I'm the district attorney for Westlake County." If Mercer was surprised, he didn't show it. He examined her documents with exaggerated thoroughness before responding. "Ms. Johnson, I stopped you because you were driving erratically. Have you consumed any alcohol this evening?" Maya's phone continued recording as she replied, "No, Officer Mercer, I have not. I was driving exactly at the speed limit and made a proper turn with my signal." "Step out of the vehicle, please." "May I ask why that's necessary?" "Step out of the vehicle now," Mercer repeated, his hand moving to rest on his holster, a subtle gesture of authority that hadn't gone unnoticed. Maya complied, emerging from the car with deliberate movements. "I'm going to reach into my pocket for my phone," she stated clearly. "Keep your hand where I can see them," Mercer snapped. "Officer Mercer, I understand you're doing your job, but I have rights. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm uncomfortable with the direction this stop is taking." Mercer's expression hardened. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." "Am I being detained? On what grounds?" "I believe you're under the influence." "I'm conducting a field sobriety test." "I'd be happy to take a breathalyzer test right now," Maya countered. "First, we'll do the field test. Now turn around." As Maya reluctantly complied, she noticed a car slowing as it passed. The driver, a local teacher she recognized, made brief eye contact before continuing on. What followed was a textbook example of escalation. Maya's reasonable questions were interpreted as resistance. Her calm insistence on knowing why certain tests were being performed was labeled noncompliance. When she finally stated firmly that she was invoking her right to remain silent and wished to contact her attorney, Mercer made his move. "Put your hands behind your back," he ordered, pulling handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting an officer." "I have not resisted," Maya stated for the record, knowing her phone was still recording. "I have complied with all lawful orders while asserting my rights." As he secured the handcuffs, Mercer leaned closer. "Rights look different from this side of the badge, don't they, Ms. District Attorney?" By the time they reached the station, word had already spread to the community. The teacher who had witnessed the stop had called Maya's mother, who called Evelyn Parker, who mobilized community leaders. When they arrived at the police station, a small but growing crowd had gathered outside. Inside, Mercer processed her booking with smug efficiency, seemingly oblivious to the storm gathering around him. Maya spent 3 hours in a holding cell before Judge Freeman arrived personally to oversee her release without bail. The judge's presence at the station at that hour sent its own message to the department. "This is a flagrant abuse of power," Freeman stated loudly enough for every officer in the booking area to hear, "and we will address it formally." For the next 2 weeks, Maya operated on dual tracks. Publicly, she continued her duties as district attorney, recusing herself only from cases directly involving Officer Mercer. Privately, she built her defense and her counteroffensive. Her first call was to her former law professor, now a renowned expert on police misconduct cases. "I need everything you have on successfully prosecuting pattern and practice discrimination," she explained. Her second call was to a data analyst who had helped her build cases in Chicago. "I need a full statistical breakdown of traffic stops, arrests, and charging decisions in Westlake for the past 5 years, broken down by race, gender, and officer." What emerged was even more damning than she had anticipated. Officer Mercer's discriminatory pattern wasn't just pronounced, it was blatant. Black drivers were 7 times more likely to be searched after being stopped. Charges against minorities were twice as likely to include resisting arrest or disorderly conduct with no accompanying substantive charge. More disturbing were the victim impact statements Maya began collecting. A black high school teacher who was handcuffed in front of the students during a traffic stop, a Latino business owner whose shop was subjected to repeated random inspections, a college student whose scholarship was jeopardized after a dubious possession charge. Meanwhile, Officer Mercer continued his patrols with apparent confidence, telling colleagues that the district attorney's case would never hold up. "She's trying to make an example of me for political points," he was overheard saying in the department break room. "But I've got 15 years of exemplary service and the full backing of the department." What he didn't know was that the department's backing was beginning to fracture. Two younger officers, troubled by what they were hearing, had approached Maya privately to provide information about departmental practices and specific incidents involving Mercer. The night before the trial, Maya sat in her childhood bedroom surrounded by files, witness statements, and legal precedents. Her mother knocked softly before entering with a cup of tea. "I'm proud of you," she said simply, setting down the mug. "But I'm also scared for you." Maya looked up from her notes. "Someone has to do this, Mom, and I'm in a position where I actually can." "I know." Her mother sat on the edge of the bed. "Your father would have been proud, too. He always said the Johnson women were born fighters." Maya smiled, thinking of her late father who had taught her that justice wasn't just a concept, but a practice, something you did every day through choices large and small. "Get some sleep," her mother advised. "Tomorrow you make history in this town." But Maya worked late into the night, refining her strategy. Officer Mercer might have the weight of tradition and institutional power on his side, but she had something more potent. The truth, meticulously documented and ready to be revealed. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity on the morning of the trial. Judge Freeman had moved proceedings to the largest available courtroom, anticipating public interest. Even so, people lined the walls and spilled into the hallway. Officer Mercer arrived in full uniform, accompanied by the police union representative and a department attorney. His confident stride suggested a man who fully expected vindication. Maya, representing herself, sat alone at the defense table in a simple charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. The contrast was deliberate, the solitary figure challenging the institutional might of law enforcement. The charges against her were relatively minor disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, but the stakes were enormous. This wasn't just about one traffic stop or one officer. It was about a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for years. After opening statements, the prosecution called Mercer to the stand. He delivered his testimony with practiced precision, describing Maya as immediately confrontational and exhibiting signs of possible intoxication. He detailed her refusal to comply with standard procedures and how her behavior escalated a routine stop into a public safety concern. When it was Maya's turn for cross-examination, she approached the witness stand with quiet determination. "Officer Mercer, you testified that I was driving erratically. Could you please specify exactly what erratic behaviors you observed?" Mercer shifted slightly. "You were weaving within your lane and made an abrupt turn." "Let's review the dashboard camera footage," Maya suggested, motioning for the court technician to play the video that had been entered into evidence. The footage clearly showed her vehicle maintaining a steady course and making a normal turn with proper signaling. "Does that footage show any erratic driving, Officer Mercer?" "The camera doesn't always capture what an experienced officer can observe," he replied stiffly. "I see. And you also testified that I showed signs of intoxication. What specific signs did you observe?" "Slurred speech, delayed responses to questions." Maya played the audio recording from her phone, which captured her voice speaking clearly and responding promptly to each of his questions. "Does that sound like slurred speech to you, Officer Mercer?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. Recordings can be deceptive. Maya proceeded methodically, dismantling each element of his testimony with contradictory evidence. Then she shifted focus. "Officer Mercer, in the past 3 years, how many traffic stops have you conducted?" "I don't know the exact number." "Hundreds." "Our records indicate 637 traffic stops. Of those, approximately what percentage would you estimate involved Black or Latino drivers?" "I don't categorize stops by race," he replied curtly. Maya presented a chart to the court. "This analysis of your own report shows that 72% of your stops involve minority drivers, in a town where minorities make up only 27% of the population and an even smaller percentage of registered drivers. How do you explain this disparity?" I stop vehicles based on observed violations, not race. Yet the data shows that white drivers receive warnings 68% of the time for the same violations that result in citations or arrests for minority drivers 81% of the time. Is that also coincidence? The courtroom had grown utterly silent as Maya presented exhibit after exhibit, each more damning than the last. Judge Freeman, known for her strict control of her courtroom, allowed the questioning to continue uninterrupted. "Your Honor," Maya said finally, "I'd like to call additional witnesses who can speak to a pattern of similar encounters with Officer Mercer." The prosecution objected vigorously, arguing that other incidents were irrelevant to the charges at hand. After hearing argument from both sides, Judge Freeman made her ruling. This case involves charges stemming directly from the officer's judgment and assessment of the situation. Evidence suggesting a pattern of similar judgment calls is relevant to evaluating the credibility of that assessment. I'll allow the witnesses. What followed was devastating. One by one, community members took the stand: the teacher, the business owner, the student, and others, each describing encounters with Officer Mercer that followed a disturbingly similar pattern. Throughout their testimony, Mercer's expression darkened. The confidence that had carried him into the courtroom was visibly eroding. When one witness described how Mercer had referred to him using a racial slur during a stop, the officer's face flushed with anger. "That's a lie," he interrupted loudly. Judge Freeman gavelled sharply. "Officer Mercer, you will have an opportunity to respond during redirect examination. Another outburst will result in contempt charges." By the time Maya called her final witness, one of Mercer's fellow officers who testified about departmental practices and specific comments Mercer had made about targeting certain neighborhoods, the atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed completely. What had begun as a simple case of alleged misconduct during a traffic stop had become a public reckoning. In her closing argument, Maya addressed the jury directly. This case is about more than one traffic stop or one arrest. It's about the abuse of power and the erosion of trust between law enforcement and the community they serve. Officer Mercer didn't just bring the wrong woman to court today. He brought years of unchecked bias and discrimination that has harmed countless citizens of Westlake. Today, you have the power to say that a badge doesn't make anyone untouchable, it makes them accountable. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning their verdict. Not guilty on all charges. The acquittal was just beginning. Within days, Maya filed a formal complaint against Officer Mercer with the department's Internal Affairs Division, backed by the evidence she presented in court, plus additional documentation. The police chief, recognizing the public relations disaster that was unfolding, placed Mercer on administrative leave pending a full investigation. 2 weeks later, facing mounting pressure from the community and the threat of a federal civil rights investigation, the department announced Mercer's termination. For Maya, the victory was bittersweet. While she had achieved justice in her own case and initiated a process of accountability, she knew that systemic change would require more than removing one officer. She convened a town hall meeting where community members could speak directly to law enforcement leaders about their experiences and concerns. The event was tense but productive, opening channels of communication that had been closed for generations. Working with Judge Freeman and reform-minded officers within the department, Maya helped establish new policies for traffic stops, including mandatory body cameras, regular review of stop data for potential bias, and a civilian oversight committee with actual enforcement powers. 3 months after the trial, she received an unexpected visitor at her office. James Mercer, no longer in uniform, sat across from her desk with slumped shoulders. "I didn't come to apologize," he began gruffly. "I came because I want to understand what happened." Maya considered him thoughtfully. "What happened is that you believe your badge made you above questioning, and that some people deserve less dignity than others." "I was doing my job," he insisted, but with less conviction than before. "Part of your job was to protect and serve everyone equally. The evidence showed you didn't do that." They talked for nearly an hour, a difficult, sometimes heated conversation that ended with no neat resolution. Mercer didn't leave transformed, but he left questioning assumptions he had held for decades. It was a small step, but an essential one. Meanwhile, the changes in Westlake continued. Traffic stop data began showing more equitable enforcement. Community policing initiatives foster new relationships between officers and residents. Young officers who had witnessed Maya stand against injustice approached their jobs with a different perspective. 6 months after the trial, Maya stood on the steps of the courthouse, addressing a crowd gathered for the inauguration of the Westlake Community Justice Initiative, a program designed to repair the harm caused by years of discriminatory policing and create pathways for healing. True justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, she told them. It's about restoring what was broken. It's about creating systems where everyone is truly equal under the law. And most importantly, it's about the courage to speak truth to power, to hold each other accountable, and to believe that change is possible. In the crowd, she spotted familiar faces: Evelyn Parker from Soul Provisions, the witnesses who had testified, community leaders who had supported her, and some of the reformers from within the police department itself. Even Judge Freeman had come down from her chambers to stand among the citizens. What had begun as one confrontation on a quiet street had catalyzed a movement. Westlake wasn't transformed overnight, no community ever is, but had begun the hard, necessary work of reckoning with its past and reimagining its future. As for Officer Mercer, his journey was just beginning. Stripped of the identity that had defined him for 15 years, he was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his actions. Whether redemption was possible remained to be seen, but accountability was a crucial first step. Sometimes justice comes not from grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but from one person's refusal to accept what others have tolerated. Maya Johnson didn't set out to change Westlake when she moved back home. She simply refused to be another silent victim of a system that protected those who abused their power. Her story reminds us that true change often begins with a single stand, one traffic stop, one courtroom, one community willing to examine hard truths. It reminds us that systems don't change themselves, people change them, through courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. In a world where power often seems immovable and justice feels distant, Maya's story offers something essential: hope that accountability is possible, that truth still matters, and that one person's courage can ignite the courage of many. The badge that Officer Mercer thought made him untouchable ultimately became the symbol of his downfall. But more importantly, it became a catalyst for a community's transformation, proof that when we confront injustice directly, healing and progress become possible.